The United States seems to be writing off the increase in national debt to its allies in order to deceive the whole world. But about everything in order. If you earn more money than you need for a living, then it is logical that you will invest the surplus either on a bank deposit, or in real estate, or in stocks, or somewhere else so that the money works and brings in extra money. Well, if a black streak comes in your life and you start earning less money than you need to exist, then in order to survive and overcome it, you will begin to extract money previously invested somewhere to spend it on food, clothes, housing and communal services, and so on. But it will be completely illogical if you have problems with the family budget. You are sitting up to your ears in debt, but you borrow money from someone and invest it in a bank or shares. And it would be fine if you borrowed them at a low interest rate and invested at a higher one. But no, you borrow them for a higher one and invest them for a lower one. That is, not only do you not earn anything, but on the contrary, you get into even bigger debts. You will probably say, yes, this cannot be. This is absurd. I agree. No reasonable person would do that. But studying the table of changes in the external debt of the United States, we are faced with just such an absurdity. First of all, we will show you a table showing the external holders of the U.S. national debt from April 2022. Here is a list of countries, the main foreign holders of Treasury securities as of April 22nd. Now let's see how things stand at the moment. Here are the main foreign holders of Treasury securities for February 24th. The total external debt of the United States as of April 2021 was $7,078 billion. Then, by June 2021, it rose to $7,500 billion and then practically did not grow, being in the range of $7,500 to $7,700 billion until October 2023. And this showed the whole world that there were practically no people willing to sponsor the United States by lending them money. But having recently looked at the table once again, we were surprised to find that investments in the U.S. national debt began to grow gradually since October 23rd. And as of February 24th, they already amounted to $7,965 billion. As soon as we saw this meager growth, we immediately wondered which countries had so many extra dollars that they suddenly decided to invest them in the debt pyramid of the U.S. national debt. But first, we will tell you which countries and why investments have been reduced in these years. Let me remind you that Russia has long since merged all U.S. securities. Since February 2022, after the West froze Russia's foreign exchange reserves, sometimes taking 2 steps forward, then a step back, China began to slowly get rid of these risky investments. If back in February 2022, the amount of China's investments in American treasuries amounted to $1054 billion, then by February 2024, they had decreased to $775 billion. Minus $279 billion. Japan, which is still in the first place among U.S. creditors, first significantly reduced investments in the same period of time, and then increased them again. But in general, the volume of U.S. debt securities on Japan's balance sheet decreased from $1,306 billion to $1,167 billion, minus $138 billion. Everything is more or less clear to me with these countries. And China had a significant trade surplus until October 2021. And Japan had a significant trade surplus until July 2021. That is, they had a lot of money. That's why their central banks had the opportunity to invest significant surpluses of dollars in American debt securities, albeit at a small percentage. But when the Chinese began to develop not so well with the trade balance and foreign exchange earnings, and even at the same time, the Chinese realized that their assets could also be frozen, like the Russian ones, and the Japanese had a trade balance and generally went into negative territory, both began to gradually reduce investments in the U.S. national debt. Thus, these 2 main holders of the American national debt have reduced their investments by $418 billion over 2 years. But in order for Americans to continue to live normally now, financing any of their desires, and at the same time the American debt pyramid has not collapsed, the national debt must constantly increase, and the further, the more. This process is already irreversible, because the United States has both a significant budget deficit and a significant negative trade balance, which is only increasing. But in order to continue their celebration of life at the expense of the privileged position of the dollar as the world's main reserve currency, and to hold out for some more time in the hope that, having gained time, they will have time to crush their opponents, Russia and China, the United States, it is vital not only to compensate for the money withdrawn by China and Japan. Let me remind you that Russia has long since withdrawn everything, but also to demonstrate to the whole world that everything is fine with their national debt, that other countries continue to invest their hard-earned money in their national debt, because they firmly believe in the indestructible economic power of the United States. However, for some time, the growth of external borrowing, as we said above, has stopped. The size of the external debt has been at the same level for almost 2 years. And so, literally in October 2023, something interesting happened. U.S. debt securities began to be bought up very actively by certain countries. And now let's see what kind of countries these are that have bins full of American dollars. One of these countries is Canada, which in the same 2 years increased investments in U.S. debt securities from $208 billion to $353 billion, plus $145 billion. And that's where the absurdity of this situation lies. First, although Canada's trade balance in the period from 2021 to 2023 was positive, it is only plus $47 billion over 3 years. That is, even if we imagine that the Bank of Canada bought up all the foreign exchange earnings on the stock exchange in 3 years and used it to buy American debt securities, then this would be 3 times less than the amount shown in the Americans table. Secondly, in April 2023, this information appeared. Canada has decided to issue bonds in US dollars. On April 19, 2023, the government of Canada issued 5-year global bonds worth $4 billion. The issue of global bonds will provide funds to replenish Canada's foreign exchange reserves. Also, liquid foreign exchange reserves contribute to the strengthening of the Canadian dollar in various currency markets. So much for hello, as they say. How did it happen that they had as much as $145 billion in the bins of the Bank of Canada? These are the same foreign exchange reserves that could have supported the Canadian dollar, but instead they spent them on buying American debt securities. Moreover, they continued to buy American debt securities very actively in 2023, when, at the same time, the Canadian government was forced to issue debt securities worth only $4 billion to replenish foreign exchange reserves and support the Canadian dollar. What? Are you serious? And here we are 100% sure that the government of Canada has issued debt bonds at a higher interest rate than the interest at which the US government sells its debts. For if this were not the case, which investors, in their right mind, would buy less profitable Canadian debt securities if they could buy more profitable US debt securities? This means that if Canada really bought American debt securities while selling its own, it turns out that the Canadians caused themselves material damage. Moreover, the Bank of Canada has not fulfilled its functions to maintain the exchange rate of the Canadian dollar. So maybe there is no contradiction here, and the Bank of Canada is simply not obliged to maintain the exchange rate of the Canadian dollar? No, I have to. The main functions of the Bank of Canada are the regulation of monetary circulation and credit, maintaining the exchange rate of the national currency in relation to other currencies. Isn't this absurd? It's absurd, and it's utter nonsense. We think everything is clear with Canada. And now let's move on to other countries that suddenly rushed, like crazy, to buy up American debt securities with an extra dollar that came from nowhere. This is the UK, which has increased investments from $625 billion to $700 billion plus $75 billion. Luxembourg from $314 billion to $379 billion plus $65 billion. France from $239 to $284 billion plus $44 billion. Why is it unclear where it came from? Yes, because all these countries have terrifying trade surpluses. That is, they simply cannot have surplus American dollars, and even in such quantities. From these diagrams, it can be seen that these countries not only do not have extra dollars, they themselves need to find them somewhere to buy imported goods. The UK exported, that is, sold goods for $1,053 billion in 2 years, and imported for $1,600 billion, that is, minus $569 billion in the trade balance. France exported $1,200 billion worth of goods and imported $1,534 billion, minus $331 billion. Luxembourg exported by $33 billion and imported by $51 billion, minus $18.6 billion. What conclusion can be drawn from this? None of these countries, mathematically speaking, could have made such large investments in US debt securities. So, based on all of the above, we can assume one of two things. First, or the United States is simply howling the whole world by the nose. They agreed with their closest allies that they would write off the increase in the external national debt on them so that it calms everyone else down and shows that Americans are fine with the debt pyramid. There are so many people who want to buy their treasury securities. In fact, it is likely that they are already printing money without any restrictions and without regard to the global financial system. According to the principle, we will print as much as necessary and do not care what happens. At the same time, without selling debt securities to anyone, as it was before, but simply dumping them on the Fed's balance sheet. Second, either I am the Queen of England. We think that if this is the case, then in the near future inflation in the United States will begin to accelerate again from the next injection of a significant amount of dollars into the global financial system, just printed, not borrowed by them. The tendency to accelerate inflation in the United States, by the way, is already evident. For January 3.1%, February 3.2%, March 3.5%. But if one of the listeners, bankers, or financiers can logically explain this inexplicable phenomenon and show how Luxembourg was able to scrape together $65 billion in 2 years and invest them in a treasure from the United States, we will be glad.